Hi, little bear. Are you cozy?
Yeah. Oh, big yawn. Okay. You go back to your very busy day, okay? Okay. Hello friends. For today's video, I'm going to be doing another plan, read, review where I go through some of the things that I have in from my local library, some NetGalley ARCs, those sorts of things, and then I figure out what I'm going to be reading for the week. So it's essentially a TBR mixed in with, at the end, a wrap-up where I go through my thoughts on what I've picked up. And one of the things I have in from the library would be The Witch King by Martha Wells. This is one that's an anticipated release for a number of reasons. One, I've wanted to pick up something by Martha Wells for quite a while, but then on top of that, I think that the synopsis sounds really interesting. There's not a whole lot there. It mostly just tells you that there's somebody who someone tried to kill them, and when they have awakened, it would seem they've awakened in a new body, and now they're going to try to figure out who did this to them and why. And that's really all the synopsis seems to indicate, which I think already sounds incredibly fascinating. But on top of that, the library, because this is a new release, only will let me check this out for the amount of time for one checkout. I can't renew it. I could have said that so much simpler. I can't renew this one, so I have a very limited amount of time to try to get around to this. So I'm going to try to jump into it right away. I'm really excited. I've tried to avoid seeing other people's thoughts because I know Martha Wells is a little bit of a booktube darling as a result of the Murderbot series, which I also really want to pick up. Hopefully I can pick it up soon. That way I can kind of compare and contrast my thoughts on a fantasy novel versus what I believe is basically science fiction novellas. So I am excited about that. After we have a book that's nonfiction. This is kind of an impromptu one, but a friend of mine recommended this, and so I said that, okay, I'll see if they have it at my library, and then I saw that they did, and I reserved it, and it was in immediately for pickup. And because it's impromptu, I want to get to it right away so I don't push it back. And that book would be Fall and Rise. This is about 9/11. This is one of those topics that I think is, the details are not really ones that I think most of us want to look all that into, because how people died is so horrific, and it's, I know, going to be a really devastating topic, but I've heard from my friend that it's very, very well done. So picking that one up. And then this is not in from the library, but I wanted to get around to it as soon as possible because I'm very curious what I'm going to think of this, and that would be Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is, of course, the author who wrote The Poppy War as well as Babel. And both The Poppy War and Babel were ones where there were aspects to them that I really liked. There were aspects to the stories that I was really, really impressed by. And then there were some other things that I wish had been done a little bit differently. And so for me, I feel like R.F. Kuang is clearly a very strong writer. I think the amount of not only effort, but research that goes into her works is incredibly admirable. But I haven't found that book yet that I feel like is my R.F. Kuang book. And I'm almost wondering if, because this is not fantasy, if I'll end up liking it more, because I read so much fantasy that I almost think that I go into a lot of fantasy books not with higher expectations necessarily, but more of, I'm more critical on, I'm pickier with my fantasy than maybe I am with certain other things, just because I read and consume so much of it. So I'm curious to see if maybe I'll end up having, sorry, there's a plane. Anytime there's planes, I get distracted, so apologies. I don't know if you heard it or can hear it. But anyway, point is, I'm wondering if, because this is also going to be me dipping my toes in a different genre, if it'll be a plus for this, or maybe it'll work against it and I'll think like, oh, I just wish this was fantasy. I don't know, we'll see. But I do like reading outside of fantasy here and there, and I didn't realize as I'm saying this that I'm actually doing that with having a nonfiction on the list of books that I want to pick up. I also have recently read Serpent and the Wings of Night. This was something that I had intended to pick up months ago, and then saw that the audiobook was going to be released after the physical copy was released, and it was going to be released relatively soon from the time that I'd set it on a TBR, so I figured I'll just wait until the audiobook's out, and then I'll have a mix of both the physical and the audiobook. I also really like doing immersion reading, which is where you listen and read at the same time. It just helps me really lock in and stay focused. So I read that one and I've finished it, so I thought I'd let you know my thoughts on it. This is a fantasy romance story, and while of course the romance aspect of it is big enough that I think a lot of people consider it fantasy romance, I do think that if you're somebody who is picky about just how much the romantic plot lines can take over, then this might actually be a good one, because I do think that it balanced the fantasy and the romance pretty well. And also, I think a lot of us have seen vampires done many a time, and sometimes we can be kind of tired of it, but I actually thought that the way the vampires were done in this was it was engaging, as far as it was exciting to hear the lore of the vampires in this particular world. It felt like an actual fresh, unique take on vampires while still having a lot of the vampire lore that we're accustomed to. Because certain stories, they tell you they're vampires, but they feel nothing like vampires, and you're like, just call them something else. What are we doing? So it actually felt like we were pulling from vampire lore, but then adding something and doing different things. And the setup is that our main character is a human being, but she was raised by what is essentially the most powerful of the vampires. He kind of took her in and raised her as if it was his own daughter. And she has had so much working against her as a result of being a mortal. And so she is trying to hopefully ascend in power. That way she is just as strong as her father figure, and she does not have to fear the other vampires among the other courts. And the way that she wants to attain this power is through this competition that is put in place through their goddess, the goddess of night, basically, and is the one that is like the mother to the vampires. And whoever wins this very cutthroat competition can ask for a boon, and the boon that she wants to have be granted to her if she is able to win this competition has to do with power. So that is the setup for the story, and I actually quite enjoyed a lot of the things about this. It wasn't one where I was necessarily blown away. I wouldn't say that I thought it was a new favorite. I know a lot of people have really been liking this one, and I'm always a little hesitant because fantasy romance is one of those things where I am new to it, and so it's harder for me to figure out when it's something that's going to appeal to me and when it's something that isn't going to work for me at all. It's because sometimes it doesn't work at all. And it is basically its own genre. It feels so separate from fantasy because the themes and the tropes and the pacing, the character dynamics and relationships, they all feel so drastically different from each other a lot of the time. So in this instance, I did like how all of those things played out. I thought that the pacing was really well done. I liked the world building. I liked our main character. I liked the relationship building throughout the story. I did think that the ending felt a little unnecessarily shocking, and I'll read the sequel, but I didn't love the direction it took at the very end. It wasn't enough to make me hate the book or anything like that. I just thought it got a little too over the top at the end. But like I said, I do plan to pick up the sequel, and if I'm not mistaken, I think this series is going to be a series of duologies. So the sequel will conclude the characters in this story, and then after that, I think we're going to get some of the other characters that have been introduced more, so their stories, kind of like what the Bridge Kingdom is doing. But I did enjoy this one, and I personally think it is a lot better than some of the... I thought it was better than Fourth Wing. That's another one that's really hyped right now, and I think this one is much, much better. But anyway, that's it for now for my thoughts on what I've recently read, and then we'll go ahead and go to the library because I need to pick up Saga, Paper Girls, and the other one, Why the Last Man. I'm kind of accidentally doing a Brian K. Vaughan, Luna just came in, a Brian K. Vaughan themed video. I didn't mean to do that, but it kind of turned into it over on my other channel, Full Meta Analysis. So those are the comics I'm going to be picking up. So if you're interested in my thoughts on those, then check out Full Meta Analysis because that's where I will be discussing them further. But I gotta go pick those up from the library as well as anything else that's come in. So we'll go ahead and do that, and also maybe have some clips of Luna Bear because she's adorable. All right, jumping into what I ended up getting around to this week, I'm going to start with Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. So I was saying before how I wasn't sure if this not being fantasy was actually going to be a positive or a negative. And of course that it could also mean nothing. It could just be that I liked it or disliked it. It had nothing to do with its genre. But regardless, I do think that it not being fantasy helped. I loved this. I really, really liked this. This is my favorite thing by R.F. Kuang I've read. So the Poppy War, I never completed that trilogy because while there were things about the first book I liked, and I'm not necessarily opposed to continuing on with the trilogy, I also didn't love that first book, and I kind of thought, you know, let's see what else she ends up writing. Maybe someday I'll read the rest of this trilogy, but we'll also see if she writes something else. And then she wrote Babel, and I liked Babel more than the Poppy War. One of my biggest criticisms, though, of Babel was that I felt it was predictable because it was written, it felt like using the same blueprint that the Poppy War used. There was a lot of things about Babel that I kind of saw coming because I'm like, okay, it feels like a similar trajectory to the character Rin in the Poppy War, and the moments where there's going to be an emotional hit, or there's a moment where there's going to be something devastating to society, or there's going to be something where suddenly we're not sure which road our main characters are going to take, and you get it. So I was excited to see what she did next. I always love when authors take chances, whether that's dipping their toes into another genre or writing a story with a completely different perspective than what you typically get with them, or they're doing a genre-bending kind of story. I just like when authors take chances, even if it means that I'm not going to get what I was hoping for, because there have been times where I think Naomi Novik, I've said, is a good example of this, where I love Spinning Silver and I don't care for Uprooted. And so while on one hand I like the consistency of whenever you have an author where you're like, I always know what I'm gonna get, I always know I'm gonna like this, but while that's true and I like the consistency, I also like when authors can just be free to do whatever they want. And so I really like that R.F. Kuang took that chance, and for me it's the best thing I've read by her. I think that I kind of inevitably saw some people's early reviews and things like that. I try not to see what other people say beforehand before I've had a chance to pick it up. And it does seem like thus far, this one maybe has the most mixed feedback, still mostly positive. But I guess, I don't know, we'll see. Maybe I'll have the unpopular opinion and this will be her least, for a lot of people, the least favorite thing by her they've read. But I thought it was so fun. That's maybe not the right word. If you don't know the setup for Yellowface, the idea is that we have a woman who is basically R.F. Kuang, and she's just this young star where she writes these really impactful stories that require so much research, and she went to all these fancy schools, and she's just that person in publishing. She's just that author that immediately they chose her. She's just the it girl. And the main character, June, is like, I'm her friend, but I kind of hate her also. How come her? Why her? And she a little bit resents her and a little bit hates her, even though they're friends. And then the main character, or I should say the it girl, not the main character, but the it girl, Athena is her name, dies in a really ridiculous way too. And then June, because they were both writer friends, finds her manuscript that is unknown to anyone but her, and she does not go into reading this manuscript with the intention of stealing it and publishing it as her own, but she ends up doing just that very thing. And then so you're following her kind of psychological downfall and her trying to navigate the just immense amount of love and adoration she gets, and how publishing is just falling over head over heels for her, and then the inevitable backlash when she, as a white woman, is writing a story that is primarily about Asian individuals during World War I, and people are, is it your place to write this? And there's a lot of things that you see thrown at authors that they have those sorts of things said to June, and June is just so unlikable, but also so entertaining to follow. Like, it feels... R.F. Kuang did a great job of where you're like, I don't want to stop looking at this train wreck of a woman, but also I almost feel like I shouldn't have fun watching her because she's so terrible. I don't know, she just like I really enjoyed, I guess I like satirical R.F. Kuang because this is a satire. So it's just like the most extreme version of herself is the Athena character. And this woman is just like the manifestation of resentment. And everything that gets thrown at her with publishing, everything that gets thrown at her with reviewers and people on Twitter, it's like really everything is just the most extreme version of all of those things. And I just thought it was really great. I really enjoyed it. To me, I don't know if all of you have seen this movie, and maybe you love this movie, but I'm like, this is what Tar wished it was. I'm going to press pause for a second and say, as someone who majored in music, Tar drove me up a wall. That stupid masterclass scene, I was like, nobody is in Juilliard as a violinist and not playing Bach. What the heck? Like, I was losing my mind. I was losing my mind watching that movie. But anyway, this is actually written from somebody who knows about the industry and who knows about reviewing and who knows about arcs and who knows about all these different things. And so that's why I say it was like what Tar wished it could be. And it takes a weird turn at some point where you're like, is this happening? And Tar kind of did that a little bit too. And you're just seeing the way that you're seeing the way this not great person ticks. And it was a lot of fun. I really liked it. I really, really enjoyed this book. I kind of couldn't put it down. I read it all in a day. I had so much fun with it. So I kind of, not that I don't want her to keep writing fantasy because she has so much knowledge and I think she brings something interesting to the fantasy genre in her books, but I kind of liked how different her voice was in this, and I kind of like sassy, satirical R.F. Kuang. So yeah, for me, that was a big hit. I really, really, really liked it. And now I'm sad. I don't know, because there's not another one like that. There's not another R.F. Kuang contemporary satirical thriller. I mean, it gets really out there at some point. But anyway, after that, I did not complete this just yet, but I thought I'd update you on my thoughts for Witch King by Martha Wells. Opening, amazing. Immediately, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And I was very invested. So I talked about before what the very, very brief synopsis is. And that brief synopsis is just the opening of the book. And then from there, you're trying to learn more. The downside is currently where I'm at. I think I'm about 100 pages in. Yeah. Where I'm at, it's kind of now going back and forth between past and present. Which I think when you already start present day with a, whoa, what's been going on? Because to reiterate, the character wakes up and they're like, who tried to kill me? And they like put themselves into someone else's body. And then the people that are around are shocked and they're like, you really thought you could take me out? And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And then, he doesn't know, the character doesn't know who tried to do this to him, what their motivations were. He's trying to also rescue somebody who is an ally of his, a friend of his. And he's like, I gotta get to the bottom of this. And you're like, let's get to the bottom of this. I want to know what the heck is going on. And then you go to the past and you're like, all right, I guess we're back here now. And it's kind of giving you some context for things, but not context necessarily for the present day. I'm sure it will come together. But right now it's almost like, here's this present day plot that you don't know and I'm not helping you out with. There's so many things thrown at you at the beginning where you're like, okay, I gotta try to remember what this is. And okay, so this is how this works with the witches, and this is how it works with the demons, and this is how it works with these other people, I think. And so you're trying to take all this in. And then you go to the past and you're like, I still don't really know what's what, but I'm trying. And it's just kind of an interesting decision because it makes it a little difficult to get into. So I weirdly have gotten less into it the further I've gotten, but it's one of those like, well, maybe it's just going to take time. So hopefully I'll have good news to report when I do finish this. But so far it's a library book, so I'll have to take the tabs out at some point. But I have tabs, and only one of those tabs was for like I liked that moment, or liked that line. The rest of these are like, I need to reference back to this stuff because I'm really trying. I really want to understand because it seems so cool. It seems really cool. And then, man, sorry, I have my books on an ottoman down here. Fall and Rise, the story of 9/11. This was very difficult to read. It's one of those books where I think it's very important, and I think it was very enlightening in a way that I don't know, that it's one of those things where you're like, ugh, it's important to know, but it's also, you almost don't want to. So it takes you through, it's broken up into a couple of different parts, The first part is taking you through the hijacking of the planes. And it's very much giving its respect to the people who lost their lives during this tragedy. So there's so many very brief, very intimate moments of a little bit about so many of the different people that died. And so it's not just like, this is so-and-so, this is their height and their weight and their profession. It's not that kind of stuff. It's like really specific things that kind of define a person in a very simple way, but also a profound way. And you're getting these bits of information about these people, and then you're watching them die. And it's real, and you know it happened, and you're hearing, oh my gosh, I'm like, it's hard for me to even talk about or think about because it's awful. But the phone calls, oh my gosh, sorry. I need to calm myself. Oh my gosh, I can't even talk about it. I'm trying to talk about it. I'm sorry. It's a really serious thing. And just the recordings, they do have some of the recordings of the phone calls between the people that were on the planes and them calling, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. It's rough. I didn't cry when I read it, but now talking, because it's one thing when it's like in your head, but then when you have to vocalize it. So they have some of the recordings of the phone calls. So you're seeing what was said between people because they knew, especially one of the flights, because one of the flights was delayed. And so once the plane was hijacked, the people that were calling their family members were telling them other planes have been hijacked and they hit the Twin Towers. And so that plane, those people on that flight, they knew what was coming because the other planes, and this is one of those things where like if you don't know about what's happened, it's going to tell you, and if you do know, you're like, yeah, I already know this. But the hijackers, at this time, this wasn't something that was a thing. The idea of hijacking a plane so that you could have it go into a building, like that, it wasn't really a thing that happened. And so when they hijacked the planes, people didn't try to fight back against them because they thought it was a typical like hostage situation, because they used our typical views of hostage situations against the people on the planes. They would tell them like, if everybody just stays if everybody just stays calm, then you'll all be safe. We just gotta get what we want, basically. I'm wording it, very briefly and poorly. But so the first couple planes, I mean, they thought like, oh my gosh, okay, we just gotta cooperate and everything will be fine, which isn't true, obviously. So that's most of part one. And then part two is the people that are trapped in the towers and trying to get out. And it's just rough. It's rough. And I think the book did a great job of not sensationalizing this, not trying to dramatize it, I guess you could say. It was just telling you, like, these are the people, these are the heroes that tried to save them, or the heroic acts that just from one person to the next, people going back, people trying to help others, people not abandoning people just doing everything they could to help each other. And then the end kind of wraps everything up. It's really rough, but it was very good, and I tabbed it up a bunch, even though it's a library book, and I will likely get a physical copy and then tab it up again, and then eventually return this. It was really good. So I managed to not cry. Yeah, that reaction that you just saw was basically me reading it, where I was like, oh my gosh, and it was very good. My app, Hoopla, I actually was able to listen to the audiobook immediately through Hoopla, so hopefully you can check out the audiobook as well. It's narrated by, I believe, the person who wrote it, and there's so much clearly research put into this book. I mean, so much of the last chunk of it is so many pages of just all the names of the people that passed away, but also the appendix from this whole chunk is like references and the people who passed away and things like that. So it's not quite as chunky as it seems, but it's still a pretty big book. But anyway, very good. Highly recommend it. And that's my reading for this week. It was an interesting mix of books, So Let me know your thoughts on what you've been reading lately. If you've read any of these, let me know. Let me know if Witch King, if you feel like it's going to get more or less accessible. I really hope it does because there's so many cool world building elements. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.